Welcome to the Dr. Show, where we learn about women's health and sexual wellness. Today, we have a wonderful guest with us, Louise Kirk, who's coming to us from the UK. And Louise, would you mind just giving us a little bit of your background, please?
I'd be delighted to, Joe, and it's such a pleasure to be with you. I often watch you. I listen with great admiration to all you're doing. Um, I come as a stubborn mother. That's how I put it to people. I was a school governor of my children's little village school, and one of these aggressive sex education programs came in. What shocked me most wasn't actually the morals. I didn't expect those to be good, but they even got the biology wrong. And I thought to myself, if they can tramp in on our children and even get the biology wrong, we've got to do something. Now, when I say they got the biology wrong, I could see quickly what they were actually doing, which is sex education in England was created to sell contraception. And as soon as you realize that, you can pick up the little clues as to what was happening. Um, I'm a great believer that you can't just protest, you have to put something in instead. And I knew that our teachers needed something. So I started looking around. Now, these people, I won't be more ruder than that, but anyway, they'd destroyed the earlier sort of hygiene type programs so that we were being forced to have this particular aggressive program. And that was the beginning of my, if you like, political activity. I realized that this was a very political subject. So this was in 2004. And basically, since then, I've been looking at the politics of sex education as well as everything else. But the next thing I found was that I was bringing into England a wonderful character education program from Latin America. Now, this was all done through family contacts. I mean, this is the way God works. I should say that my faith has always been strong. My faith and my husband's, without him, I couldn't do anything that I'm doing, has guided everything that I have done. So if God was asking me to bring in this program, okay, I would do it, but I didn't know what I was doing. I thought that it was character education, I should say, and it was done without any religion being in there.
Mhm.
The idea from Christine Volver, who's a marvelous lady, who was a friend of my parents, that's how I became involved, was that in Venezuela there were lots of children in the shanty towns for whom the entire framework of ordinary values had fallen apart. She saw that young children were becoming pregnant, were joining gangs, all the things that you talk about as well. But they didn't necessarily want to. And she realized that if you get to them early enough, you can give them back the framework of values to take them to what they really want, which is the long-term loves and marriages and children, family life, and the things which are typical for anywhere. So I started off on that, thinking that everybody would be so pleased to have these books. And that was my next comeuppance. I found that that wasn't the case at all. And so I was learning fast. But I should give a little bit more background. So that's how I came into, if you like, sex education, character education, and the politics behind it all. But it wouldn't be fair to talk all about that with my background before. I started off as a married woman. In our marriage preparation, we were given natural family planning, and I thought it was magnificent. And I thought, why haven't we all heard about this? And so I became a trainer. And again, I thought everybody was going to love this training. Not a bit of it. I found it incredibly difficult to find anyone to teach. And we'd by then moved up from London into Derbyshire, Sticks, countryside. I contacted about 12 different parish priests, couldn't find many who would take me at all. Well, I got a few successes. I had one meeting with engaged couples. I found myself apparently the talk of the pithead in Doncaster. That's to say, the miners at a at a coal mine were
Ah,
apparently talking natural family planning at the pit head. So there was interest in the things that I was talking about. Um, but it was still very slow work. Um, and I thought to myself, if we're going to get anywhere with this, we've got to start a lot earlier. So that was, if you like, a link with the fact we've got to get in there with sex education at a much earlier stage. And I just love all the stuff that you are doing on that, because if I'd known all of that earlier, I could have done much more. But then more surprising things happened. Young mother, 4 children, no money, and I suddenly got an invitation to the Vatican to a Congress on Fatherhood.
and what year was that?
Down. And that completely changed my life. It was a fabulous Congress. Cardinal Trujillo led it off. And I also got a blessing from St. John Paul, which remains very precious to me. I learned so much, but what I really picked up was the dangers of contraception. I mean, among hundreds of other things, because I can't tell you about everything, but it completely changed my life. Me, fatherhood, where did this come from? It was all a huge surprise. I was also asked to give a talk on the Vatican, same Pontifical Council for Families, instruction on sex education, the truth and meaning of human sexuality. I don't know if you know this document. It's a
No.
fabulous document. Anyone should read it. It came in a little book in those days. Now you can get it online. And there's nothing like reading something to be convinced by it.
Mhm.
So from that, I picked up the incredible importance of parents teaching their own children. So you piece those various things together and come back to the fact that I remain a stubborn mother. So, okay, I was Oxford educated and all the rest of it, but both David and I decided that it was more important to have one of us creating a home out of our house and being a mother to the children at home. Now, this isn't necessarily was very typical even then, but much less so now. And we certainly had a lot of financial, penalties for doing it, but I completely never regretted it. Um, and I stumbled into things like never sending our children to nursery. I'm now a great believer in that. I don't think it's necessary. When I say that, I should add, of course, if mothers want and are helped by children going to the nursery, absolutely fine, but watch the number of the hours. I'm talking about the necessity from the child's point of view rather than giving the mother a helping hand. And I'm a huge believer in everybody. But I do think it's really important to think about the various aspects of what happens in those very early years. One of them is learning communication, and they're best off with mum at home because she becomes a memory and you develop the conversation by remembering little things together. Another is concentration, nothing like letting a child be bored for them to be creative. Um, but something else which I don't hear other people talking about, and that is teaching them the meaning of work. Because a healthy child actually plays to make sense of the adult world. So while child is doing their own thing, they're also, say, helping you out, emptying the dishwasher or um, counting out the carrots that you put into the shopping trolley or whatever. But the fact is that child is spinning round adults and not lots of adults spinning around children with lots of toys. And I think that's really important for understanding the value of work and for children's later development. I don't know if you have any comment on any of that, but you can see that I was piecing together our own experiences, which I should say were instinctive. I built up the research on my own instincts. And curiously, I was brought up by a nanny. That's same. My parents were diplomats. They were always there. I wasn't sort of left with nanny, but I was brought up by a nanny. And as soon as our first child was born, my instinct was, am I as good as nanny? And then I thought, no, I'm going to be mother, and I'm going to have our children thinking, am I as good as mother, not nanny? Um, I was very self-taught. My mother would have been a wonderful hands-on mother, but she didn't have the confidence. She had lots of other distractions. She loved us dearly. Um, so I came with that sense of mothers don't really know how to bring up their children. So it was real trial and error. And I know I made many mistakes, but it was instinct. So I come to a lot of the things that you were talking about, first of all, from instinct, secondly, from this strange mix of experiences that I found myself with. And thirdly, and I should mention this also, that amazing congress in the Vatican was the start of going to congresses worldwide and then speaking at them. So I've spoken in about 10 different countries, if I really count them out. But I've learned so much from thinking of family as a whole. Um, Value of mother, the value of father, the value of proper sex education, the value of sexuality, and putting that into the economics, politics, social background, the whole thing spinning together and making a most wonderful whole. So it's a very varied background. I'm sorry I've taken so long on it.
No, I'd like to add a few things too,
Yeah,
to help our watchers and listeners understand better. You happen to go to a little college named Oxford too, correct?
yes, yes, I
So,
did.
so you don't get into Oxford, I don't think, without having some pretty in the time you went there, without having some pretty strong intellectual capabilities. So you can see that you've used them well on applying them to this whole panorama of family life, I guess you'd say. So
Yes, yes. Well, I think so, but it was certainly not the choice that everyone would have made at the time. And yes, I was very proud at the time. In those days, it was quite difficult for a girl to go to Oxford.
not
Now,
many were there, probably, right?
sorry?
Not very many were probably there with you.
No, no,
Females.
many, many more men than women.
Mhm.
When I was there. Um, but I may say not as many. My David's mother was at Oxford and his grandmother was at Oxford. So there was a sort of very strong Oxford tradition. And something that meant a huge amount to him was that his mother made the same choice. And in those days, again, it was fairly unusual to have a mother who'd been to Oxford, but the fact that she gave up a career to be with him at home made a huge difference to him and was one reason why he was so supportive of the idea that we should do this together. And I really do stress I couldn't do any of the work that I'm doing now without David. So, everything I do comes from him as well.
Can I join you in that? My wife Jody, I couldn't. There's nothing I've done that I could have done by myself. So we have the opposite sex situation going on, but we
Yes,
have the same support
yeah.
support unit going on there. So yeah, it's and uh, I think when you're living what you're teaching, I think it's really the best way to first of all to lead by example, but then also to run what you're learning and what you're experiencing in your adventures, so to speak, running it through your own relationship, with your wife in my case, and your husband in your case, and then your family, your family as well, and seeing, kind of doing your own experiment there, up close and personal in a naturalistic environment, the naturalistic environment of your real home that you that you live in. Let me ask you, if you don't mind, Louise, by the way, anything else that you want pertinent that you think you want to add to that? Anything
I'm
else?
sure other things will come out.
Okay.
I could talk at length on almost every one of those, but I'm not
Well,
going to now.
we'll pick out a few as we go along here and get
Yes.
you to dive deeper.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think, I'm really interested in listening to your story, your history. Why do you think there are so few Louise Kirks along the way? And you said that what I mean by that is, you discovered the first thing, and then you went to, your parish, and you went to other, you queried a number of different people, a number of different priests, you said, and you didn't get many takers or very few takers. And then you also mentioned, I think, that there are other women that generally were not wanting to go down that pathway, not having the insight, that you have as far as how important that time at home is with your own children and raising and speaking into their lives during those formative years. Why do you think there are so few that saw life, well, in my opinion, had the wisdom that you had as far as being able to prioritize the more important things and live a more traditional lifestyle?
I'll speak first about the priests, if I may,
Mhm.
because I think there's a huge role for educating priests, and it's the reason actually I brought it in. I know that you'll be going to an audience with Catholic, non-Catholic, whatever, um, but if I can speak particularly at this instant about our celibate Catholic priests. Now, I've met some who have been the best of teachers. And of course, John Paul himself was the best of the best. So I'm not saying that it's because of their role that some of them are uncertain. Some of them are absolutely terrific. But I think that many of them were not given an adequate training themselves, and they're terrified by the whole subject, particularly because of all the abuse, so that they um, feel very uncomfortable. Um, and I think that that also isn't untypical of people of the age that many of those priests are. Younger priests will be very different from the older priests.
Mhm.
Um, but those older priests come from an age where, frankly, the sex education that any of us had was pretty minimal. So it wasn't just the priests. I think that I might come back to that afterwards too, because I think that's influenced a great deal of why we have so much sex education in schools that people ignore. Um, but yeah, so I think that they haven't been well trained. They're very uncomfortable. They're not unwilling, but they need helping hands, and they need to be treated very gently and helped along, because they're kind, good people, and
Mhm.
they're much more likely to meet the people who've um, disputed with the church and had difficulties, and then said, okay, well, don't you worry, we'll leave it all to conscience, or just keep quiet, frankly.
Mhm.
So that's that on the priest. I think on my own path, I should say that probably actually many more people were doing part-time work in the time that I was bringing them up. And that's becoming more and more difficult now. And very often that's financial reasons.
Mhm.
But I think it's also just the way people follow each other. And if you've gone to all the extremes of going through all the hurdles of many academic exams, etc., and then you've gone off to university, the obvious thing up the ladder is to go on into a career, and that's often demanding. I think I should now actually switch from people of my age, because more of us were probably giving time to our children then than is currently the case.
Mhm.
But I do feel very strongly that the whole education of children, sorry, of girls in particular at school, needs to put to them this double um, tension, which as a Catholic I see particularly in the role of Our Lady. She was both wife and mother and virgin. And I think that those two strains, if you like, are very specially in every woman. We have the longing for wife and mother, and we have the longing, the spiritual longing to do something with our lives which is beyond just our own families. We don't want, for most women, I mean, obviously there are some women who are only career, there are some women who are only wanting to be at home, but for the majority of women, you have that mix. And children at school, girls in particular, but the boys' expectation of the girls is that now all towards career. And I think that needs to be rebalanced. I would further say, and that goes back to what I was saying about work, we've corrupted the whole notion of what work is, professional work.
Mhm.
It made such a difference to me when I was told that I was a professional mother. My work was professional, because you have to take out from it the whole idea of whether or not it's paid. And then you begin to realize that what is, if you like, professional work is something you give a lot of your time to, where you grow in virtue, where you've got an outcome which is creative and which is helping other people. But
Mhm.
whether or not it's paid is to that extent irrelevant. We all need to earn money, but I think helping girls to see that their work in the home is just as important as their work in an office or their work doing anything else, um, is a very important lesson. And so, therefore, I think you need to look at the careers advice they receive at school and at university, as well as the strict sex or character education.
Yeah. I agree completely. I agree completely. And as you said, things have gotten only stronger in the career
Yeah.
direction since you and I were young. So, um, my mom was a complete stay-at-home mom until we all got out of the house, and then she took a job when we were
Yeah.
all out. I was the youngest one, so out off to college. She took a job at that point. So, and that seemed to work well. And my wife Jody has done the same thing. She's worked in the home the whole time. But you know, if any of the men out there that are listening to this, haven't realized this already, it's definitely there's whether you stay home or whether you go out to a professional job, so-called professional job, there's a lot of work in either place, either in the home or in your professional job, or just call it a job, and they're both very important. You can't really live a good life without having both of them done well. So it's a realization I think that people need to make, and like you said, that split that people with girls and the women, anticipating that, navigating that difficulty, that tension, as you said, I think is really really important part of what we could help with education with them with. So,
Yes.
you wrote a book. I want to get a few specifics out too, as far as your background. Tell us about the book that you wrote, please.
Yeah. Here is my book,
Okay.
Sexuality Explained, a guide. Sorry, you probably can't see it. A
No,
guide for
it's coming
parents and
through. It's
children.
coming through great.
Um, and the reason I wrote it was because when I was thinking about how you um, replace this bad sex education that I was witnessing in our children's school, I've both then and since broken it down into four components. The first is the sort of character education that Christine has created in the Alive to the World program, and I can give you afterwards the website for that. But the second is the actual sex education. Now, as I said, with truth and meaning, the Vatican guidance, there was a very great emphasis that the best sex educators are the parents, and I was convinced by that. So is Christine. And so when I looked at this book, sorry, her series of books, I said, but Christine, we haven't included that. And she said, no, because the parents do it. And I said, from experience at the school gate and chatting to my fellow mums at the village school, but not only do they not do it, but if we are trying to educate them um, with the fullness of understanding fertility and understanding the dangers of contraception, many of them can't do it because it's not like subject like, I don't know, geography or history or something where you can just pick up some new information and then teach it to your children. It's something that goes to the heart of who we are as people. And so I wrote my own book. That's where it all came from. I didn't want to bring God in, not because I don't love God, because obviously I do, but because I didn't want to frighten anyone. And to get to truth, you can either start with God or you can start with his creation, because his creation shows his truth. And so I used my training as a natural family planning teacher to describe for parents the biology, but doing it all through storytelling. I say for parents, you'll notice that. I don't know if you ever play the game of croquet, but if you play the game of croquet, you have two balls, and when you hit your opponent's ball, you put the two together and you hit them cleverly. You hit your ball and you shoot your opponent wherever you want it to go. Well, I get the parents thinking that I'm shooting their children, but actually I'm controlling the parents. So I'm doing two in one. But because it's all done as storytelling, it's not daunting. And what the book actually does is go through 10 different chapters, which are designed for the children at different stages of their um, prepubescent and adolescent life, but for the parents to read all together so that they get the full picture. So it starts telling them all about the girl's menstrual cycle, sort of mum to daughter,
Mhm.
and then going through all the understanding periods and also understanding sexual chemistry, not with all the detail that you give us that I'm learning from you. And then I go to Dad and Michael, the boy, and then I look at STDs, and then I finally look at contraception after all of that. But doing it very gently so that it's opening up topics that the parents can then continuing talk about with their child. So yes, that's what it is. I may say that my greatest joy with that was learning from a social worker who came up to me that she uses my book with some of her clients who are single mothers. Um, what I wanted to do was to create a family atmosphere so that even if both parents aren't there, the child would get the sense that it was mum speaking or dad speaking. And this apparently works with these single mums. And she went on to say that if the mother likes it, she buys a copy for them out of her own money. And she added, and if anyone knew that she was doing this, she'd probably lose her job. So I was, full of admiration for this woman, but I was really thrilled to hear that.
That's a huge compliment. Yeah, that's
Yes,
wonderful. And what
yeah.
a you put a lot of thought into it as far as handling a touchy situation, and for especially one that a lot of parents would rather just pass on, as you said earlier. A lot of them just pass on having the conversation with their children. So, and everybody can understand that, but it sounds like Sexuality Explained is really a great tool for anybody, but also especially for parents. So, yeah, I'm always I don't know why I should be surprised. I'm not surprised. That's not the right word, but I'm always inspired, I guess, would be by your cleverness and your again, I said as I said earlier, your intellect, your level of intellect on all this, and how effective it is. Unfortunately, we're coming down to the last few minutes here. I always ask my guests these last questions, and hopefully we'll get through them and have a chance to bring up anything
Yeah.
else that we think is important. But what, in your view and experience, is the most dangerous to young women in our current culture? What do you see in the UK and kind of in your travels around the world?
I'm afraid it's very simple, contraception. From the point of view of health, and I know that you are passionate about that, as I am as well, we think about food, etc. One day people will look back and think, weren't we bonkers to think that we could feed young women strong drugs and put like devices inside them and this, that, and the other, which would have impacts that, frankly, the people who create them don't fully understand themselves. But more than that, it's contraception which has allowed the hookup culture, has allowed the sex education revolution, sorry, the sex revolution to take place. If you take away that tool, all sorts of boundaries come back into play again. So I think it's very difficult to think of anything which is actually more more dangerous than that straightforward thing.
Right. And the Catholic Church was the one church that stood against it and has stood
Yeah.
steady against it. So, very admirable and very foresightful, I guess you'd say, seeing
But
in.
I do emphasize because one of the difficulties, and Catholics are guilty of it, they start thinking that it's for Catholics.
Mhm.
And whenever I talk to anyone on this subject, I say, no, this is natural law. It's
Right.
for anybody. doesn't matter if you've got a religion or not a religion. And actually, sometimes find it easier to talk to non-Catholics than to Catholics,
Right, because they've
which is all
probably
quite interesting. Yeah.
been through the issue earlier.
Yes.
The next question, what do you see in the future for women's health and sexual wellness? What do you see coming down the pike?
Well, of course, the reverse. And that
That's the
is
solution, right?
the wonders of discovering natural fertility. I think, again, we often forget that in the 1960s, two sets of scientists was looking at the same scientific facts. They were
Mhm.
looking at the woman's cycles. One set of scientists went off to see how they could interfere with them artificially. The other set of scientists um, thought, how can we work with them? And it's the latter set of scientists who've come up with some amazing knowledge which can easily be passed on to women. But the fascinating thing is that not only does it mean that contraception is completely unnecessary, but it actually leads to happier marriages and to greater sexual satisfaction to be able to follow the woman's cycle. And it draws couples together in the way they plan their sexual and love lives, and the way they plan their lives in so many other ways, which you can tell us more about than I can.
Well, that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. The word empowerment is, I think, way overused and it's become so cliche. But that I think that is an appropriate use for what you're describing, teaching a young woman how she works, how her cycle works, and how to take ownership of it. That would be an empowering, a truly empowering, I think, um, thing to do. So, I admire you on what you're doing there, and I applaud you, and I'm fully in your corner in what you're trying to do. I agree with you completely. The last one, what specific things? Now we sort of talked about one already, but what other specific things should we be attempting and accomplishing in order to create better health and sexual wellness for young women in the future? Anything else besides that would be the ground, the basis, the
That
kind
would be the ground. I mean, I've talked about two very specific things. My third now is going to be the very big and broad, and that is changing an entire culture. I don't think it comes short of that. And I think we have to work with, well, specifically where we can through our own communities, but our own churches. But I do think that the sex education of children going right down to the age of 5 is critical. I really do mean it. And I think it's from two points of view. One is that they're being fed poison at the moment. But the other, which is really creative, is that the sex educationists have created a vehicle ready for us to take over.
of
So, let's use it.
Right, right. Maybe we could reframe it and reterm it as sexual integrity education
I
rather than
love it. I
sex.
heard you using this term and I want to adopt it. I think that's exactly what we need to talk about. Sexual integrity. Yeah, absolutely bang on.
Well, thank you, because it's
Yeah.
occurred to me, it's been fairly recent that, there's so easy. There's so many ways to go wrong, especially for boys and the male side of things with the way our brains are made and the environment that's developed with the porn and hookup culture and all of those different things that are unlike what again yours and my childhood were like. Again,
Yeah.
I was born in the 1950s and I didn't know anybody, any of my schoolmates. I didn't know anybody who had come from a divorced family situation. In other words, on the framing it positively, all of my friends and again my extended friends, and I went to a high school of 2000. They all had their mom and dad, their original mom and dad there at home. Now in high school, I started, meeting a few, and this is the 70s by this time, meeting a few kids that had their parents had split up. But when you have a 5%, out of wedlock birth rate back in the early 60s, they had, I think, a very idealistic or idealistic, if that's the right pronunciation, of the way it should be as far as the norms, guiding us towards marriage was the context for sex, so again, if we can, as you said, if we can start moving back in that direction, and I do think, I don't think, I know that the biology, the physiology of it leads in that direction, because particularly young women, they thrive, most of them. There's a small, maybe a 10% minority that have inclinations towards, promiscuity, but most of them thrive, I think, in the environment of what you described earlier, of getting married, having children, having a family, have the family develop. So what we're down to about, well, less than a minute now. What are your thoughts on that as we close?
What I um, completely support you in is concentrating on the vast majority of young people. I think that we've all been taught that we've got to chase after the LGBT difficulties, and they are difficult. What bothers me much more is that we aren't creating the strong families as the norm. I mean, in England now we've got over 50% of children born out of wedlock.
Hmm.
That to me is much more serious
Yeah.
than the fact that some people are T or whatever else. Not that those individual things aren't important, but so I fully support the idea that we must concentrate on the majority.
Yes. Very well said. We're gonna be ended here in just a second. Louise, thank you so
Yep.
much for being a guest.